If you go 30 years back and look at the fighting games market, you will not find a single title that wasn't inspired or informed by Street Fighter 2 in one way or another. Capcom nailed the formula, so it just made sense to take that formula and then start thinking, well, what can we do to make something different, something fresh? For a lot of games the answer was pretty simple. Let's just make Street Fighter 2 but swap the characters. Titles like that very much deserve the unflattering claim of a Street Fighter clone. That's why instead we're going to talk about Mortal Kombat, a game that didn't just stand out on its own right, but also spawned a gigantic franchise that inspired its own copycats. But before we begin, please consider subscribing to DashFight for more fighting game videos. Thank you. The development history of Mortal Kombat is kinda like Greek myth, in a sense that it can change quite a bit depending on who you listen to. All of them seem to converge on the fact that when Midway saw the success of Street Fighter 2, they tasked Ed Boon and John Tobias with making a fighting game within a year. Past that, it's a bit more hazy. Tobias said that he and Boon already had an idea for a fighting game similar to Karate Champ, so the release of Street Fighter 2 just helped to convince Midway of this idea. Except apparently they were actually working on a Universal Soldier game, but since they didn't get a license, they went back to a ninja-based fighter that was previously rejected by Boon and Midway. Even the origins of the name are unclear. Tobias suggests that they already wanted to call the game Mortal Kombat, but due to legal concerns, changed C to K. Meanwhile, Boon suggests that the new name just stuck after Steve Ritchie, the voice of Shao Kahn, saw the word combat with a K and came up with the title. Regardless of origins, it all turned out for the best, because their final ideas ended up tapping into some of the most popular trends at the time. 80s saw a massive explosion in action hero movies, and marked the peak of Western infatuation with ninjas and Eastern martial arts. And even though MK released in 1992, none of those things lost relevance. A fighting game roster filled with ninjas and guys who look like they could be main stars in a straight-to-VHS action movie was a perfect mix. But giving them special abilities on top of that is what really sealed the deal, because those abilities elevated them from just being digitized sprites to becoming iconic characters. It's hard to imagine Mortal Kombat reaching the same success without this. This? Or this. And of course, everyone knows one other element that really set MK apart from everything else: the violence. Famously, it's the game that led to the creation of ESRB. Even though it looks tame by today's standards, it was enough to cause a massive scandal. It even got censored or outright banned in some regions as a result. For players, however, the violence was simply entertaining. Ed Boon famously added fatalities because he hated the dizzy mechanic in Street Fighter 2. So in order to make it fun for both players, he turned it into a bloody spectacle at the end of the match. But even outside fatalities, combining digitized sprites with squirting blood added a lot to the game feel. Even to this day, when you boot up the game and hit someone with an uppercut or a roundhouse kick, it is so immensely satisfying. You get great feedback through both audio and visuals, which was fun enough to keep players coming back for more. Not to imply that the gameplay itself was bad, but the presentation and game feel simply took the crown. The combat had a lot of flaws that you'd expect from the game of that era. It wasn't quite as fluid as the games that came later, and the balance wasn't much of a concern for players or developers at the time. Although they did actually try to remove some of the infinites in the final revision. At the same time, it's not quite as bad as you'd expect. Since the moves were very similar for every character, it meant that you could make any of them work, and the versus matches typically came down to the fundamental mind games and the RPS of fighting games. It also meant that the barrier of entry was very low. It only took a few matches for a totally new player to get into the swing of things, which made MK fairly popular with the casual audience.
You just go easy on me.
Welcome to
I'm new to the game.
Welcome to the real world!
Welcome to the real world!
The solo players weren't left out either, thanks to the now classic Test Your Might minigame and the challenging arcade run. The final stages required beating multiple opponents in a row, and if you managed to overcome that, you were given not one, but two unique bosses. Goro, a four-armed beast, and Shang Tsung, a wizard who could morph into any other character. While not quite as iconic as Shao Kahn, they were still tough enough to make people sink the coins and try to find a way to exploit the AI. At this point in time, the original game mostly has value as a piece of history. The improved sequels simply overshadowed their predecessor. However, it's still interesting how many of the core concepts were established back in 1992 and have remained largely the same. Even though each new title shakes things up with their own set of distinct mechanics, the staples are still there. The same jumping arcs and jump kicks, the same beefy uppercuts, even the same awful music. No matter which MK you play, the original game's DNA will always come through in some way. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and bye bye.